Okay, we are up to Daf Kuv Vav Amud Aleph, right by the word Teku, and just a quick synopsis. So we talked about there's different kinds of arrangements that people can have. It could be a seicher renting a field. You can be an oris, which you are a sharecropper, which basically you don't own the field at all. You just put in the work. Sometimes you put in the seed, sometimes you don't, different customs, and then you have an arrangement where you have to share the profits, the yield with the owner of the land. And sometimes the owner of the land gets 2/3, you get 1/3. That's if they put in the seeds, or you get 2/3 and they get 1/3 if you put in the seeds, or a quarter, whatever the arrangement is. And then you have a chayker. A chayker is somebody who also rents the land, but the chayker gives a fixed amount every year from the yield to the owner, to the landowner. So if I can make up for him, I'll give him 100 bushels of wheat, and regardless of what the outcome that year is, that's what you have to give. And also, sometimes you pay just with money. I'll always give you $100 a year, regardless if I have a good yield, bad yield. You'll always get your fixed money. And we learned in the Mishnah that when it comes to the laws of Aris, poor quality, a poor crop, a good crop makes no difference. It's all relative anyway. You share whatever the arrangement is. But when it comes to chayker, the question is, if you had a bad year, like it was a terrible drought or terrible winds that made the seeds fall out, wither, what happens then? The arrangement is still fixed, or can you say that things have changed? So we made a distinction between a makas medina or individual property. If it was only your property that got affected, we say it's your mazal chagorim, it's your own bad luck, and you still have to continue paying the landowner whatever arrangement you had. But if it's a makas medina, so it's not only confined to your land, but it's a makas medina, then you can deduct to whatever, whatever, I guess, relative to what you anticipated, you can deduct a certain amount, depending how bad it was. And now, with just the Mishnah itself, makas medina would mean the entire country. However, the Gemara, we have two Amoraim, limited further. One Amora said it's sufficient if nishtat fureiv sadaisan. That one, Rabbi Yehuda said that if the majority of the fields, withered away, the wind came and knocked it about, that that's considered a makas medina. You can renegotiate whatever you have to pay. However, Ula went a step further. He said, we just look at the immediate fields around your field. If the immediate 4 fields around your field, the neighboring fields, all were affected as well, then it's a makas medina. We ignore what happens beyond that. Okay, so then the ruler had a number of questions based on his view. So we're up to the Gemara now. On my leg, 4 lines on the top. What happens if the landowner told you, Zarachita? The landowner told you, I want you to plant wheat. Now, wheat, let's say wheat or take barley. There's an advantage in planting wheat. The advantage in planting wheat is that it doesn't affect the soil. The advantage of planting wheat is that the value of the crop is quite high. The disadvantage of planting wheat is that wheat sort of eats a lot of the nutrients of the soil. On the other hand, barley does not eat that much nutrients of the soil, but it's also not worth as much. So what happens if the owner said to you, I want you to plant wheat in this field? He tells the chayker, I want you to plant wheat in this field. And he went ahead and he decided to do sa'irim, to do barley. So he deviated from what he said. The shtadif, ruba de bagli. But what happened was, the majority of that region, so this is going to be a question according to everybody, the majority of that region had this failure of crops. So too, this field of barley. But the thing is, he did not follow the arrangement, which was to plant wheat. Instead, he planted barley, and he got affected like everybody else. And everybody else had wheat fields, but he had a barley field that was affected like everybody else. How do we deal with this? Now, the Gemara is a fascinating chakira. Do we say the Amalei, the owner of the land, can say to him, "Look, if you would have planted wheat like the original arrangement that we had, then havinamim mishtatfin." Sorry, the guy, not the landowner, the chayker, the farmer. He says, if I would have planted wheat, the same thing would have happened. What's a chilik? Wheat, barley, the winds came, they don't discriminate one another. The same thing would happen. So mine afkamina, the fact is that it was affected, so let's renegotiate the whole deal. Oidim, or perhaps the landowner can say, Motzi Amalei can say, Ilo zarate chita, if you would have listened and planted wheat, and even though everybody else's wheat fields, were destroyed by these the terrible winds, have a Mekayim be, my field would have been an exception. And you know why? Because there's a passage where it says, "V'tigzer oimer the yakum you will decree what will be said, and the yakum and Hashem will fulfill exactly what it is that you want. This is said to Eve. In other words, I davened in the beginning of the year as Shoshana that I want to have a successful wheat crop. And had you planted wheat, my davening might have been effective. But because you planted barley, I never davened for barley, and therefore you're affected by everybody else. That's your fault. If you would have listened and done wheat and it didn't work out, then you're right. But you didn't plant a wheat field. Interesting, this very pasuk, in the rest of the Gemaras, we use it for a tzaddik, that a tzaddik goes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mekayim, and we bring a raya from Eve. The tigzer oimer v'yakum. Here we're talking about every single person has the capacity that when you daven, you can have prospects that whatever you daven for should be successful, because perhaps there's a machlekes we're going to have soon in the beginning of the end of the first perek in Bava Basra, an argument whether Eve was a tzaddik or whether Eve was a rasha. So based on that, you can say that since this pasuk is referring to Eve, if he was a tzaddik, then those are the Gemaras where it says that we learn from the pasuk that a tzaddik goes to Kodesh Baruch Hu Kayim. But if we learned that he was not a tzaddik at all, he might have been a goy or whatever, he was not a tzaddik, then in that case, we can say this regards every single. This is in regard to every single person. Anyway, the landowner says, "I davened, I could have been successful." And you didn't.
Your model is a little bit strange. It's sort of bringing religion and spiritual things into straight out mominus.
In other words, because the moment you did not follow through with our arrangement, you're on the back foot. That's the point. If you would have done our arrangement, you're right. But you did not follow our arrangement.
So why did you have to bring in spiritual things? Just say you didn't do that arrangement.
But the other guy's argument is that it would have affected regardless. What's wheat or barley? That's his argument. So my counter argument, there is a chiluk. And look at the Gemara concludes, mistabra, in logic, the Amalei, that he can say, this is definitely something that you can rely on. I davened and I might have been successful. On your footpath, on your road, naga oil, light will shine. Okay, so that resolves that one. We'll come back to this on the bottom of the page. What about nishtadfu kol sodaisav? What about an interesting thing here? All the fields of the machkir, that's the what do you call the owner of the field, let's say, all of his fields, wherever they were, got destroyed. And this field as well got destroyed with all other fields. So what happened was there was no Makkah's Medina here. The only field in this area was this guy's field, but the guy had 10 fields. Every one of those fields was affected by the wind. So in this case, Mike, how do we deal with this? Do we say, well, the on the one hand, the landowner says, look, even though you started with the baga, in this area generally there was no, they weren't affected. So we cannot reorganize. You owe me still whatever the fixed amount is we agreed on. It's not a Makkah's Medina, it's your tough luck. But this guy counters and says, what I'm talking about? All your fields were damaged. So obviously it's your tough luck, not mine. So you, the farmer, you the owner of the land, we have to renegotiate. It's all your fault. Since all of your properties were affected, can say to him, it all happened because of you, nothing to do with me. Because he says that mishtatfu kol sodesecha. He said all your fields were affected. So he answers him back again, a religious answer. Mishtabra makes sense. The Malay, he can respond. The owner of the land can say, has nothing to do with me. If you think it's my bad luck, then let me just tell you, if you think it's my bad luck, it says by Yirmiyahu, when he lost everything, it says that if it's because of my bad luck, then have a mishtayil reported. Something would have been left behind. Even when the Eibishter brings disaster to somebody, you leave something behind. Like Yirmiyahu said, a little bit was left. But over here, nothing is left. Because nothing is left, and obviously that's not because of me. That's because of you. So therefore, the arrangement still remains, and you have to pay me yearly whatever we agreed on. Okay, what about the other way around? Nishtadfu kol sadoisav shel chayker. The farmer, one who's putting in all the work, all of his fields, whatever he was working, got adversely affected by these winds. Nishtadif aruba the baga. So too, the area generally was affected. So you can argue it's a makas medina, and if it's a makas medina, then I have a right. The farmer has a right to renegotiate. But the problem was that the farmer, all of the farmers' fields in other regions as well got affected, not just in this area. The Shtad Nami Habadai, and this is also affected. I mean, do we say, even the Shtad of Ruba the Baga, because in that area, most of the fields were affected. Then Menakale, then he said, look, it's a Makas Medina, and therefore we should renegotiate. Oidem, or perhaps the landowner could say, even the Shtad of Kula Arate, because of all your properties got affected, Motse Amale, he can say to the farmer, your field is different than everybody else's. All your fields are not even in this area got affected. It must be you. And therefore, it's your tough luck. We are not going to renegotiate. So the Gemara here says, and you would think it would be the same outcome as before. Says, no, Mistabra, it makes sense. The Amalei, that he can tell the farmer, it's your fault. It's your fault. Says Gemara, why? But why can't he counter? Why can't the farmer say, "Hey, if it was my fault, then I would have had something left behind," just like you said. Why can't he say, "If it's my bad luck, have the Messiah put something left behind, and I have nothing left. The entire field was wiped out, the entire crop, and all my other fields as well." That also by me should have applied that pasuk, something was left from everything else. Because the Gemara here is different. Because the landowner can say, if you were deserving that, like Yimia said, that something should be left behind, it would have happened to your other fields. You lost all your other fields, and now you lost this field as well. And your argument is that if it was your fault, that Abe should have left you something behind. No, this field, it doesn't belong to you. This field, as Taisus and Hashem explained, this field belongs to the landowner. If it was your bad luck and you have to have something left over, why isn't anything left over in your other fields? There's a raya, you don't even deserve this ma'at maharbe, you don't deserve. You got nothing left, and it's all your fault. And therefore, too bad, we don't renegotiate. Then when I make I'll ask you a question of that. Let's say it was a year. The din is that if you you have a right to take back a property within 2 years after you sold it. You sold the property. Land, a field, a steachuza, whatever inheritance. The first 2 years, the sale has to be worthwhile for the buyer, so you cannot touch it. But afterwards, you can go ahead and redeem your field or buy back your field. So it's more like this. So you sold your field. Now these 2 years have to be able to yield some kind of a produce. So what happened during those 2? Otherwise, you cannot buy back. And in fact, interesting thing is that even if the person who bought it is happy to sell it back, we say no. You cannot buy back the first 2 years. Okay, you cannot buy back the. So what happened like this? It was a year of either it was terrible winds and it knocked about the flowers and everything, the seeds, whatever it came down, or it dried up and it got discolored. Right? So there's a year when there was no crop. Does that count as one of those 2 years, or do we have to give it another year for the buyer to enjoy the field before you can buy it back? Or, for example, Shvis, one of those 2 years was a Shemitah year. The person couldn't plant. Couldn't sow. Or there was a drought like in the time of Eliyahu, and the Gemara here is going to say that in the time of Eliyahu, the entire world suffered from that drought, so you couldn't plant at all. Though if that year is not part of the 2 years, and you have to give the buyer another year. Now, we are comparing here, we're comparing Kishnelio, we're comparing, one of the examples is these crop that was ruined, and another example is the years of Elio. Now, what do you know about the years of Elio? The loy have it through a cloud. It didn't grow anywhere. So over here, av hachanamid lo have it through a cloud. I have a question on both opinions. One opinion said the majority of the region had to be affected. Another opinion said the 4 properties around. It seems clearly here that even majority is not considered a Makkah's Medina. It's only if it's all of the fields. And in fact, the Gemara will say the entire world. So then, where's the Makkah's Medina? These 2 Amoraim, how can they come along and say this is considered Makkah's Medina? Says the Gemara, but if there would be, let's say, tvua growing, then it would count as a year. If there's anywhere growing tvua, we'll no longer say that it's considered a year that there's no tvua, and therefore it's not Makkah's Medina. So what do you see from here? That if the Braisa compares the affected crop to the years of Eliyahu, then it's not considered affected as a Makkah's Medina unless nobody has any crop growing at all. And so what's pshat? How can they say 4 fields or even majority? You cannot compare these 2 halachas. When it comes to this halacha of selling a property, over there is talking about shiny chosam, the omakra. It says in the pasuk over there, b'misper shonim achar b'misper shnei tvus. It says the year of tvu, you have to sell to him for 2 seasons. Yimachalach. So we dash him because it calls it shnei tvua. Let's say for 2 years. It says years of tvua. So the Torah is very particular and focuses on these years and describes them as tvu years. Is shanim sheyesh ben tvua ba'olam. If there's tvua anywhere in the world, then it's still called a tvua year. In your area you don't have it, I can still call it a tvua year. But if there's no tvua growing anywhere in the world, then there isn't. So therefore, over there we're comparing it to Shnei Eliyahu. That's different. But in our case, when it comes to a commercial thing, then if the majority of the fields are affected, then obviously it's a Makkah's Medina and he has a right to renegotiate. According to you, if you're telling me that the only time it's considered like a non-Tavua year, if nobody has any crop, one of the examples is Shemitah. Well, Shemitah, it's only in Israel that you cannot plant or grow, but in the rest of the world you can. So why is that considered a year that no, you cannot buy, you cannot count that in the 2 years because you cannot grow anything? Shemitah doesn't count because the rest of the world can plant. So it's Elmiato Shvi is why isn't that counted as one of the 2 years that you can grow in Chutz Laretz? Says Shvi is different. Afkar to the Malkahi. There the king ruled that you cannot grow on Shvius. And because the king ruled you cannot grow on Shvius, it's as if the king, the Eibishter said, this is not called a Shnasa Tvua. For Yidden, this is not called Shnasa Tvua, even though it's only in Eretz Yisrael, but this is different. Shemitah is different. Okay, says him further, according to you, if you're telling me that Shvius is considered a year that nothing grows, so we know that if you sell a field and you want to, if Yovel, it comes back to you. If you want to buy it back before Yovel, then you have to, work it out. So the Torah says, if you make it Hegdish, for example, and you want to redeem it from Hegdish. So we say that the 49 years, it's 50 whatever, Shkolim, and then if let's say you calculate, every year it's a Sela and a Pundian, every year it's a Sela and a little bit change that you have to pay to get it back. But l'chayda, since the Shemitah years don't count, you should deduct the 7 years of Shemitah as if they're not existent. Because if you tell me that a Shemitah year is Afghan to the Malka, it doesn't count, it's not a year. So if so, as when you deduct how many years are left to Yovel, and then you work out how much you have to pay Hegdish in order to redeem it, then you should remove all the 7 Shemitahs, so it's only 42 years, and then break up 50 and divide it into 42 parts, not into 49. Why did we learn? You give a sell a punyan for every year. Amalei said to him, shiny hotzim, there is different. The chazil mishchah there is different because you can use, since even on Shemitah you cannot plant, it doesn't say shnei tfuas when it comes to redeeming from Hegdish. As long as you have a use for it, even in the Shemitah years, you have a use for the field. What can't you do? You cannot plant any field, but you can use it to spread out your fruits or something else. And therefore, because it does not say that description, Shnei Tvuas, as long as there's a benefit to the field, it's considered useful. And therefore, you have 49 years of use and you have to pay a seller punyan per annum. Says if you, to redeem it. Says the Gemara, it's suitable to spread fruits there. Amashmul. Comes along Shmuel, he says, when do we say this din? that a makas medina you renegotiate, elisha zara you planted, bitsamcha and it grew, and then and then a locust, for example, came and hit it. Anything, a makas medina, okay, you renegotiate if it affected the entire region, or the majority of the region. What happens? You didn't plant it at all. You know, because you didn't plant it all, even though everybody else was affected. My field was not affected because I didn't plant. Nevertheless, so you want to argue, I should be able to renegotiate because there's terrible makkah. He says, no. The Amalei says to him, Ilu Zarata, perhaps if you would have planted, have a Mekayim be, then my be, well, maybe the pasuk, a nest would have happened. And there's a pasuk where it says that that it didn't dry in the time. David Melech said, it didn't dry when the bad times were made of, even though it was a time of famine, I was able to fill myself. So you had no right. You didn't plant. You can't say everyone else is affected, so you didn't lose anything. No, maybe by me a miracle would have happened and it would have grown. So therefore, our arrangement still remains. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Motzid Absheshes, you're telling me that we can rely on miracles, and based on a miracle, I have a right to extract from you money. Let me ask you a question. Absheshes said, let's say you have a shepherd who is doing the right thing. And we learned before that the shepherd is allowed to leave when everybody else leaves to go to town to do whatever it is. They don't have to stand 24 hours a day with the sheep. Ubali, he came to town, and while he was there, came along a wolf and basically and grabbed a hold of the sheep, or so a lion came in and trampled one of his prey. Ain't oimrim. So we don't say, we don't turn to the shepherd and say, you went to the city, even though everybody else went at that same time. They all used to gather together and go together to the city. We don't say to the shepherd, well, if you wouldn't have gone to the city, you would have been there with other sheep, nothing would have happened. We assess. If he could have rescued his sheep, then Chayiv is responsible. If not, Potter is Potter. Now, why? Namely, let us say, if you would have been there, no, but you're saying we assess naturally if you could have saved or not. But what about miracles? Why don't we say, maybe if he physically would have been there, even though you're just assessed that it's impossible for him to save the animals from the wolves. Remember, we learned before the wolves come from different directions, whatever. He couldn't save the animals, but maybe if he would have been there, a miracle would have happened. It would have been fulfilled. So the owner says the land, the owner of the lamb says, there's a pasuk by David HaMelech where it says that gam esari v'gam hadoiv hika abdecha, that you hit the lion and hit the bear, and that was a sign for him that he can go and fend off Goliath who was threatening Eden. And so we see clearly from here.
Right through Shas, there's always a klal achrei arav, kol approach with the root approach, everything achrei arav. Why don't you have that? If every field is
but here's the other way around, because we already have an arrangement established. You're trying to get out of the arrangement. And therefore, for me, it's less proof. I'm not taking money away from you. On the contrary, you're trying to take the money that you owe me and hold it back to yourself, even though you're holding on to the money. So therefore, it's not like the normal case of a Meitzach Raya. So, excuse me. So in this case over here, he says to him, I have a right to rely on miracles, like David Melech, that, he attacked the lion and the dove. He was there to repel. Says the Gemara, so therefore, he said a miracle. So he's asking a question. If you're right that we can rely on miracles, so why can't the owner tell the shepherd? What do you mean? What do you mean you couldn't have saved and therefore you're potter? No, you're chayiv, because if you would have been there, maybe a miracle would happen, like by David Melech. So the Gemara says the shepherd can say, Amalek can say, if you're saying on account of you being the owner of the sheep, and I would have been there, a miracle would happen in your source, then then you know what kind of miracle should have happened? Like what happened by Chanina B'Doisa. What do we learn in Martinus happened to Chanina B'Doisa? The maskin easy dubi bekanaya. Chanina B'Doisa's sheep took a bear that threatened them, and they took their horns and pierced the bear and carried the bear around, which is an unbelievable miracle. If you are a person, so the shepherd says to the owner of the land, you're this kind of person that can perform miracles, or miracles happen to you, and that's why you have a taina to me. If I would have been there in your schus, everything would have saved, even though I couldn't naturally, because they assessed that I couldn't, then bigger miracles should have happened. Your goats should have been, the lamb should have picked up the wolves and tossed them away.
What about Ein Soimchen Alanei?
It's not a question of Soimchen Alanei. This already happened. It already happened, not Soimchen at all. It already happened. So now we're going back and backtracking and say, what could anything have been saved or not? So right now the Gemara is saying we cannot say a miracle is not a taina. You can't to say that the miracle could have happened is not a taina, and that's why the case of the shepherd, he says if miracles can happen, then I would have expected a bigger miracle. So the same thing here is in the case of the field. True, you didn't plant anything, but nobody's field was successful. So you can't. So the guy, the farmer says, "Don't have kindness to me because if I would have planted, it would have been the same thing anyway." So, in fact, I saved you money. I didn't put the seeds in the ground. So therefore, and don't tell me a mice of miracles. That's what Gemara is saying right now. Don't tell me a mice about miracles. If you cannot perform miracles like a Chanina ben Deisa, then he's not trying to miracles. So leave me alone. Says the Gemara, why? There are degrees, are grades of miracles. The Chanina ben Deisa says the Gemara ties that whole page that tells us different stories of how special of Chanina ben Deisa was. That the vinegar became like oil and burnt. He was able to perform these unbelievable miracles. But not everybody's like Chanina ben Deisa. So Gemara says l'chayda. The name Malay, why can't the owner of the sheep, if you believe in these, if you say that the landowner has a right to say to the farmer that if you would have been there, if you would have planted the field, maybe a miracle would have happened and our crop would have been successful, then why can't also the owner of the sheep tell the shepherd, even though naturally you couldn't protect my sheep, but name Malay, I'm not suitable for great miracles, but small little miracles I would have been. And if you would have stood there in front of the wolves, maybe they would have been scared, intimidated, and they would have ran away. Kasha. It is a kasha, but we don't change our mind. And we're saying over here is that that he can say that if you would have planted, who knows, that maybe would have been successful. The taste asked an interesting question. Okay, let's put it right now. Let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says, by the way, Taisa says a very interesting thing. Taisa says that even though before we said that a person, you tell me, "My big miracles more." We just said before that a person has a right to say, "I davened on Rosh Hashanah. I wanted to have a successful crop," and therefore, why can't he say simply, "If you would have planted the wheat, maybe my davening would have helped." And by not that, but if you don't buy a lottery ticket, you'll never win. But if you buy a lottery ticket, you have a chance of winning. So why can't you use the same argument you had on top of the page? I davened, and if you would have planted, I would have been okay. Forget about miracles. No miracles. Just my davening. I davened to have a good crop. So if you would have planted, despite the fact that everybody else's crop got ruined, ours would have been successful. Not because of miracles. So Taisa is a very interesting thing. Taisa says there's two ways of davening. One way of davening is you ask for a very specific thing. I want my wheat crop to be successful. And then there's a way of davening you say, I want that I should be successful in my panos or whatever I do. And Taisa says, when you make these generic kinds of requests, nothing happens. What do you think? Everything you're going to touch is going to be successful? Maybe the thing you touch is not what the Abishah decided to give you success. But, says Taisa, if you are very specific in your request, and you say that you want, and you say, I want my wheat to be successful, you have a much better chance that your davening will be successful. So the top of the page is talking about he davened for the wheat. Here we're talking about my farm should be successful, whatever the crop we put in there, without specifying the crop. And therefore you cannot say, I was relying on let's rely on my davening, maybe it is successful. Very interesting cases. Teaches us how to, when you're davening and you have a specific need, you should be very specific in your requests, exactly what you want. Setting about it further, we have two brises of Kuva and base. Tanichad, one brise we learned, let's say you planted 1 year and you were affected by locusts. Okay, that year, obviously you renegotiate. If it's a Makkah Medina, you renegotiate. And then Vishniya, and then you did a second year and the same thing happened. Again, it was affected, so you renegotiate. Zaida, but the third year, don't even bother planting because you know it's not going to work out. But Tanya, on the second price we learned that Shlish is even the third year you should plant. It's the VSA the fourth year you don't plant. What's going on here? Like Kasha. Remember, you had Yivam as an argument. How many times does something have to repeat itself before we consider that a chazak? Rebbe Dama betrei zimna have a chazak. We're talking about katlonis. A woman that lost to her husband, they both died in a similar way, in a similar place. Then the question is, can she marry a third time or not? According to Rebbe, no. Today, Zimla have a chazaka. Happened twice to raise a chazaka, and she should not marry again. And therefore he says the same thing here. That 2 years in a row that the crop was lost for the same thing, then you don't plant a third time. And yeah, and what do you and Rashbag says Betla Zimna have a chazaka. Shmuel says that 3 times is considered a chazaka. In other words, the first year and the second year, if he says, you know what, I heard that's very bad. The second year especially, I'm not going to plant again. He had no right to do that, and therefore he has to. He cannot renegotiate with the owner because simply, if you would have planted it, maybe it would have grown, maybe it would have been successful. Not renegotiating. But if 2 years go by according to Rebbe, and the crop got lost, and the third year he doesn't have to plant, and he can say to the owner, "Look, there's plagues out there. Let's renegotiate." Or according to Shem Gamliel, the 4th year is the first time you can say, "I'm not planting, but we're still going to renegotiate." Says Shloki says, "Lo yishanu." When do we say this? What we just said right now. Elo shezara v'tzamcha. You planted and it grew v'achla chagav, and it was eaten by, let's say, by locust. Aval zara v'loitzamcha. Let's say it planted in the beginning of the season and nothing grew. Motzi amale balakarka, the owner of the land, can say to him, "Kol yemezera zara lavazel." Continue planting again and again. Continue planting again and again until the end of the season. You walk away after 2 weeks. You got to continue planting to the end of the season. That's how the Mefoshim learn the pashtus. Other Mefoshim say it doesn't make sense. How do you know that the crop won't be successful? You won't know till the end of the season. So therefore, they learn it means that let's say they learned unbelievable. They learned that the first 2 years or 3 years, whatever you learned before, was a chazaka. You planted the beginning of the season, and every time they planted in the season, you lost the crop. It's a makas medina. It's still not a chazaka, says Reish Lakish. Because maybe if you would have planted it 3-4 weeks later, it wouldn't have been affected by these things. So you have to now plant a month down the track and try it again and see whether it gets affected or not. Anyhow, what's the season? You tell me the season. What's the season? Amar Papa says, Ada osu arise midabra, until these sharecroppers, leave the wilderness, the pastures, and they go into the city, end of the day. The kaima kima arashayu. And this is to do with the zodiac. So when the what do you call it? When the kima is a certain arrangement there, constellation. But the way Rashi explains it as follows: he has 12 mazolis, and each month is a different mazel, and each mazel works for 2 hours. And because it depends what time of the year it is, because when the sun is where it's positioned, the sun is between the stars. So 1 month it's between here and 1 month is there. So you have all the different ones. So the way Rashi explains is that the tle, which one is the tle? I don't remember which is the tle. Whatever that the star sign is for the tle. The tle comes out in the month of Adar. The tle comes out 9 hours in the day or 2 in the afternoon. And it finishes, because each one goes for 2 hours as they go in orbit. And the end of that 2 hours, which is the end of the 9th hour, that's the tail end. So in other words, when the tail of the tle, which one is the tle? Whatever it is.
Aries.
Aries is the tle. Okay. So when the Aries is around other time, when the tail of Aries is above their heads, when they go to the city, which is like the end of near 4 o'clock, because that's the tail end, because they start at 2 o'clock. That's when they're overhead. It's only another. That is considered the end of the season. So the middle of Adar is the end of the season for planting for that year. Basically, that's what he's trying to say. Says the Gemara, you're telling me it's the end of Adar. That's your question. It says, and Shimon Nasi agreed with Rameir, and it goes as follows. He says that by Noach, it says in the pasuk over there that it goes through the 6 different seasons. Each season is 2 months. So he says like this: when do the seasons begin? So according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Shimon ben Asya, they say it all begins in the middle of Tishrei, Sukkot. So they say Chatzi Tishrei and Mar Cheshvan and Chatzi Kislev. That is the first season, and that is Zora. That's the time of planting. Chatzi Kislev, Tevis, the Chatzi Shvat, and then the next 2 months, so from the middle of Kislev, this is in the northern hemisphere, winter, and Tevis, the Chatzi Shvat, that is Chaydev. That is actually the coldest part of the winter. And then you have Chatzi Shvat. You have for half a Shvat, Oder, and Chatzi Nisan. That is Koyer, even though it's not as cold as Chaydev, but nothing happens then. You don't plant anything then. And then he continues. Chatzi Nisan, half of Nisan, and Ear and half of Sivan is Katzah. That's the time of harvest. Chatzi Sivan, Tammuz, the Chatzi of, that's the northern summer, is Kayitz. That is the hottest time of the summer. It's called Kayitz because that's when they put out the dates to dry and so on, which is called Kayitz. And then you have Chatzi of, the second half of Elul, and Chatzi Tishrei Chaim is not as hot as then, but it's called Chaim because you don't do anything there, nothing productive. Rabbi Yehuda says, Maina, he starts the seasons from Tishrei. He said not from Sukkot, but from the first day. Same thing, but you start first day Tishrei, and every 2 months is part of the cycle there. Rabbi Shimon, he said the seasons begin from Rosh Chodesh Teshuvah. So according to Rabbi Shimon, the planting period, and he's the latest, is from Cheshvan and Kislev, those 2 months. But no one says until Adar. You said that the planting season, the owner of the land can say you could have planted later, plant later. And we said till when? Till Kima, the tail end over there, which is the middle of Adar. Here we see the latest is Rabbi Shimon holds the 2 months of planting is Cheshvan and Kislev. Man make a Bekula, who's the one who delays it the most? Rabbi Shimon. And yet Bekula Hailo come, and nobody says you can do it till Adar. It's a late kasha, it's not a problem. It depends what you're planting. If you're planting things that need to be planted early in the season, like wheat or rye, then that is the 2 months we learned about. If Shimon is the latest, he holds Cheshvan and Kislev. But there are other things that you plant which are later, like barley and beans and legumes. They get planted until Adar. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah says, "In Kibla Menamois, if the arrangement you had was not to take from the yield of the land, but rather money, then we don't care if there's a Makas Medina, we don't care if there's a drought everywhere. The fact is the money is still there, and you have to pay the guy money every week, every year, whether you had a crop or not. Who gave as a person the Kobil Adel Mizbehu Tume, this person accepted this land, that he was going to plant garlic Agudit Nahar Malkasova on the river banks of Malkasova, interesting name for a river, Bezuzi. But his arrangement was that he's going to pay, not with garlic, he will pay this guy every year a fixed amount with money. What happened was is Taka Nor that the people who was using this water was basically irrigating all the fields, and we already had the Gemara in the Durham. Remember who has the rights to the water rights, and all that. The people who were living on top of the water, where the water was coming out from the ocean, where the river, they decided to divert the water to their properties, and suddenly it dried up. And those on the bottom of the hill there, it all dried up. It didn't get any water. He's stuck in a Malkasova, and therefore he didn't have a crop. And the question is that considered Makas Medina or not? So therefore he can renegotiate, not pay, or too bad, tough luck, and he has to still pay the fixed amounts. Also, the Kamed Rav, he came to Rav Amalei, no Malkasova, the Miske, since it's not common at all for this to happen, therefore we'll consider it Makas Medina. It affected all the properties down in the bottom, and plus. We also learned that if you could have anticipated this might happen, you should have said something we had before. But here you didn't anticipate. Why would you think that somebody's going to divert the water, which naturally should have flown this particular direction? And then you had no reason to anticipate somebody's going to divert the water. So he said to him, it's a Makas Medina, Zil Nachile, go ahead and renegotiate. But we learned, Rabbi Yehuda says, when do we say that only if you pay him from the yield of that particular property? But in Kiblei Mena b'Mayis, but if you pay with money, the you don't deduct from whatever the arrangement is. He said back to them, less the chashlu Rabbi Yehuda. Nobody rules like Rabbi Yehuda. Next Mishnah. You accepted a field from your friend. You accepted a field. Let's say you're going to pay 10 koir, a koir is 30 sa, of wheat l'shana for a year. And then what happened was the loksa, and it was affected. It didn't happen. Let's say that the wind came and blew it away, or whatever happened. So what happened was wheat grew, but very poor quality wheat. Instead of the normal premium quality wheat that grew in this field, they had poor quality wheat. So the question is, can the landowner say, well, you can give me the wheat, but I want better quality, so go buy it in the marketplace? Or we say no. We say he pays him from the land itself. What happens if the wheat was premium quality? And so really, it was outstanding. Can he tell the landowner, well, the meat is premium quality, the wheat is premium quality. Our arrangement was standard quality, so I won't give you standard quality. And I'm I'm gonna keep it, I'll buy it somewhere else in the store, in the market, and I'm keeping the premium quality. Because the deal of a chaykin is you take it from the yield of the property itself. Whatever it is, premium quality, poor quality, it's the amount that's fixed. Says the Gemara, who Gabra, there was this person that the Kabbalah Ada, he received land La Safsta. The arrangement was that he was going to use the land to grow animal fodder. Now, animal fodder grows 30 days because you don't have to grow too large or too ripe, and then you would harvest it and you can plant it again. You can use it and reuse it all the time. Okay, that's what he organized. Anyway, so the Koder, this, and then he decided, you know what? The Koder decided. He then decided that he was going to use plant barley there. Decided to plant barley there. Yeah. So what happened was, well, because instead of doing barley of the safsata, so he did the safsata. The landowner said, instead of barley, which the fields normally use, I want you to use this animal fodder. Anyways, he went and did it. And then the chosher, then the zara, he plowed and he planted, and he planted barley. The loku hanasadi, and then there was a drought or something terrible happened, and the sadi all got lost. They all got lost. So, and the question is this considered a makas medina? Can he go ahead and say, let's rearrange the whole thing or not? Because they started out talking about doing a safsata. Says the Gemara, he sent the question to Kamei Ravina. He asked Ravina the question, what would you say in this case here? The shaila is as follows. The shaila is, he looks when he was affected badly. So do we say this is similar to the Mishnah, that it says over there that even, let's say, you planted wheat and it got affected, so the quality was no longer good quality, he still can give from the field whatever it is. So therefore, he can give him the poor barley that's there, is affected, and give him that. Oh, he lie. Well, maybe here's different. Why? Because when he gave it to you, he asked you to do animal fodder, the chachas, and instead you decided to do barley. And now that it was badly affected, you can't pay the guy with poor barley. So Gemara says, Amalei, he says to me, dummy, what do you compare this to the Mishnah? Hasan over there, loy of the Arla, the Shlichusa. Over there, the Demara. Over there, you did exactly what the owner wanted. It didn't work out. There was a drought or whatever it was terrible wind, and it broke everything. So, but you did the what you're supposed to do, but the land did not fulfill whatever its mission was. Hoch over here of the Ara Shlichusa Demara. Over here, the land did the Shlicha Demara because it grew the shachas. You then decided to change to something else, which is never part of the arrangement. The arrangement was to do the shachas, and he did it, and it worked well. You then decided to do barley. That was not the shlichus. So therefore, you have no excuse, and you have to pay the full amount. In fact, Taisus points out, even if he did not grow a safsta in the beginning, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, he hired you, or the arrangement was to plant this particular kind of animal fodder, and you changed it to something else, and then it was affected. So you still have to pay exactly what the original arrangement was. However, in the following case, who was a person, the couple part is mechabre, he got a wine, a vineyard from his friend. The esed doni chamre, and the deal was that he's going to pay him 10 barrels of wine, not the grapes, but you're going to pay him 10 barrels of wine. And then what happened was, that wine turned sour. And the question is, can he say to the guy, well, 10 barrels of wine a year, 10 barrels, it came from the field. I took the grapes, and this is what happened. This is mamish. It's not like the case where you change it from a safsata to say to barley. Here, it was meant to be a vineyard and paying with grapes. You did exactly what you're supposed to do. So I can pay you with these grapes, the wine. Too bad if the quality is poor. Says the Gemara again. I've kind of thought, that Loksa, if it was badly affected, he can give him still, even though it's inferior quality. What are you comparing? Awesome over there of the Avish Lichusa. There you did the right thing, but it didn't work out, so you have a right to renegotiate. Of the Avish Lichusa, the grapes grew well, the land did exactly what it's supposed to be, but what didn't go well was the wine. The wine is not from the field. The wine is what you did afterwards, and that for some reason or another turned vinegary. So you can't pay the owner with that poor quality vinegar. You have to give him good quality wine. You have to buy it out in the field. Says about it further. However, Rav Ashi is moide. Rav Ashi is moide that the dachtum, if the grapes themselves went foul, for example, became full of worms. After you cut them off the vineyards, they became very wormy. So here, you didn't alter it to wine. These are the very grapes that came from the land. And it's normal that before you turn it into wine, you leave the grapes standing to sit to rest a little bit. So therefore, you didn't do anything which was outside of the norm. And you carried out the shlichus of the land, but it was affected. Or that you had bundles of tfuah, that you cut them and you let them stay there a while, because that's normal. You don't right away take them into the winter, we know that. You let them sit and rest for a while. And during that period, it got ruined. In that case over there, you then can renegotiate. You can say to the guy, I'm giving you from the land. I did the shlichus of the land, and now the quality became inferior after harvest. It doesn't matter. Since it's the normal way of doing it, I can pay the guy with that inferior quality wheat. Says the Mishnah. If somebody, let's say, he received from his friend a field to plant barley, that was the arrangement. Don't plant wheat with that. Don't plant wheat. And for example, the deal was you're gonna pay me every year 10 kratim of wheat from this field. Don't go plant barley. If the arrangement was the arrangement was barley. Don't go ahead and plant wheat. Why? Because wheat takes away a lot of the nutrients of the karka. Even though there's an advantage of planting wheat, it's worth more money, but it takes away a lot of the nutrients of the karka, and a lot worse than barley does. And so therefore, so he says you have to stick to what the arrangement was. And chitim, but if we are organized to do wheat, he's the enus item. But if you organize to do barley, don't turn it to wheat, because you're sort of ruining the field. But if we made an arrangement for wheat, you can plant barley, because why? The landowner anyway is going to get paid in wheat, because that was our arrangement. And as far as the field is concerned, it's gonna harm it less, because the nutrients will still be there. So it's a win-win for the owner of the land, because you have to pay whatever arrangement you made. So if you made an arrangement, you're going to pay him in wheat, regardless what you grew in that field, you have to pay him the kratom of wheat. And if you decide to change it to barley, so which means that it doesn't soak up all the nutrients, absorb all the nutrients, it's contrary, it's very good, he's very happy. But the other way around, if we agreed that you're going to pay me with barley, and then you decide to plant wheat in the field, the problem is that you are now going to hurt my field. I'm going to get only barley anyway as my payment, but meanwhile you're hurting my field. You can't do that. However, Rashbag said, regardless which way benefits the field, benefits the owner, you cannot deviate from what you originally arranged. The Gemara explain why. If we agreed to grains, we agreed to what's called Tvua, do not plant kidneys for the same reason. Kidneys eats up more nutrients, but kidneys, if we arrange for kidneys, then Tvua eats less. And there's Bag again, because you deviate, you're changing, you're altering our arrangement. Says the Gemara. My time is Bag. In a case where actually I benefit the landowner, he'll get his payment regardless. It'll harm the land less. Why does Bag say you cannot deviate or alter your arrangement? He said, you know why? Because you have to be honest. The Chsivet says, She'edis Yisrael Yasa Avla, that the remnants of Eden will not do the iniquities. They won't say anything false. If you made up something, you can't just go and change it, because that's like, it's not honest. You're not being honest. You're not being honest. Says you want to make, I'll ask you a question. So you're telling me that if I made an arrangement for you, even if I benefit you, I cannot change. Let me ask you a question. From this very same Rashim Gamliel, may say Magbis Purim Lepurim. He says here that if you collect money, we had this before as well. If you collect money for Purim, tzedakah money, it must be used on Purim. However, we don't sit and analyze every poor person there. Does he need all that money? Doesn't need all that money? Doesn't matter. Now, the poor person, what do they do with the money? They have to use it for the Sudas Purim, for things for Purim. The poor person should not use the money to likach behen retzulas handle. He needs a shoelace. He shouldn't use that money for a shoelace. Elim can unless unless he made up in front of the people, leaders of the community, that I'm going to take this money that you've collected for Purim and use it for something in which I need, let's say shoelaces, because they have the right to change the proceeds or the purpose of these proceeds. These are the words of Yaakov Sha'amam Shum Meir. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, however, is Mekum. He says that you can change. It doesn't matter. No, you don't have to get mine, but Ansheir. If they give you money for Purim, you can go ahead and use the shoelaces. So what do we see from Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? He doesn't care if you change it. You just said a minute ago that you have to be so honest that if we make something up, you have to follow exactly what was made up for, and that you cannot change it, even though you benefit that person. And yet by Purim money, he says, the people gave the money thinking that it's going to be used on Purim. This person can change, use it for something else. So how does that fit in? Says the Gemara, you're right. Amar Abaye said that isn't the reason of Shimon Gamliel. No, his reason is time with Rav Shimon Gamliel, Rav Shimon Kidemar. The reason of Shimon is like my teacher and my foster father, which was Rabba. Rabba who raised him. Amar Rabba said, very interesting way of expressing himself. If you want to ruin your field, this is how Rashi learns Pshat, which is very odd that Rabba should speak this way. He's being very sarcastic. You don't normally find sarcasm in the Gemara. So if you want to make sure that you ruin your field, this is what you should do. This is the best recipe to ruin your field. Is lisre shasa chete v'shasa sari. That 1 year you plant wheat and the next year you plant barley. If you keep on changing the crop that you do in your field, you're going to ruin your field. Or shasa shesi v'shasa edid. 1 year you planted in one direction, let's say vertically, and the next year you planted horizontally. So therefore, in this case of here, it's talking about Rash Bag was, he said you're not allowed to change it on your own, because how do you know? Maybe last year he planted barley, and or let's say last year he planted wheat. If now you're going to plant barley, you think you're helping them out, but actually you're ruining the field because you changed the crop, and vice versa. That's how Rashi is. Taisha says it's the other way around, because he knows from farmers that's exactly the opposite. That you're supposed to keep on changing your crop all the time, like give your property, your land a rest. If you keep on planting the same thing, eventually the soil will be completely depleted of its nutrients and won't be to grow anything. But regardless, the idea is the same. The connotation idea is that maybe last year he did barley, and therefore this year you should do barley and not change it to wheat. The loyamram, when do we say that you shouldn't change? You didn't plow as soon as you harvested, and then you didn't plow again right before you planted to sow. If you plow twice, once after the harvest and once right before you sowed, less lamba, then there's nothing wrong with changing the crop or making it the same crop, depending on Rashi Taisus. Okay, good.